How tight can it go? How tight is the course allowed to be? Panigale V4S in our 1000 PS Hotlap test lap. On the 1000 PS Hotlap test track, I have 10 laps to get myself dialed in on the bike and then push for a quick lap here on this narrow supermoto-style circuit. And supersport bikes at this performance level are the most demanding machines out there. But they're also the ones where the wheat gets separated from the chaff, with the riders of course, but also with the bikes themselves. The thing is, you can actually compare this track a bit to demanding alpine passes, which are also really tight. And there are still plenty of people who love to enjoy supersport riding on alpine passes. And it's exactly for those riders that I do these test laps here on the Hotlap track with these completely overpowered bikes like the Panigale V4S. Because that's when you realize how usable and accessible this insane immediate performance potential is, so that even an average guy like me can still handle it in those tight hairpins. Let's jump straight into the hairpins. Here it's the case that because of the typical supersport long gearing, you more or less have to ride in first gear. And then of course the question is, how well does a bike work in first gear? And nowadays, with many supersport machines, it actually works pretty well, including with the modern Panigale V4S, because it has well-tuned electronics and an engine that's set up beautifully in both directions, braking and acceleration. You've got the situation where you tip into the radius, the engine braking has to be well controlled, the ABS has to be sorted, and the throttle response has to be spot on. And all of that works at a really high level. But maybe you can see it in the footage. That transition when you shift from coasting to loading the throttle again could do with just a touch more perfection. There's a bit too much free play in the throttle. I have just ridden the Street Fighter V4S before this, and on that bike it worked a bit better. Here with the Hypersport engine, there was a hint of hesitation, a bit of delay in there, which might have cost me a tenth of a second here or there. But we don't really need to argue about tenths of a second. I mean, my start, I don't want to make excuses, but I think that was the worst start of all my test laps. But the rules are merciless. I get one attempt at the start. And bikes that make starting easy and accessible are at an advantage. Bikes where you need a bit of talent are at a disadvantage. The problem was the clutch didn't engage smoothly, it bit aggressively, and I basically shat myself, rolled off the throttle, and that cost me easily 4/10. So a best time was never on the cards, but I still wanted to show you guys that completely unfiltered. This is a sports engine, which of course brings with it a few weaknesses in everyday use, like a clutch that bites a bit aggressively. But with other components like the suspension or the brakes, when that Brembo kit is gleaming out at you, you don't feel that aggressiveness at all in the saddle, not even here on the Hotlap course. And I have to say, that's fascinating. I'd put it this way, with this bike, the chassis, the brakes, and of course the engine character, you can roll along calmly in two styles. You can ride it casually in everyday life. It doesn't feel threatening. It always feels fast. You always have that sensation of being on a proper track bike. But as if by magic, it isn't some exotic diva. It still comes across as a bike that's actually pleasant to ride. I almost slipped into saying it's an easy bike to ride, but then Some beginners might get the idea that it's beginner-friendly or take it too literally, but in reality it isn't. The fact is, thanks to the perfection they now have in their systems, you can steer the bike through everyday life in a comfortable and straightforward way. That's also partly down to the engine character, because at lower revs it doesn't deliver that explosive level of performance. You can see it here as well. The way it accelerates out of the corners isn't quite as brutal as it might be with the naked bikes, which are geared a bit shorter, rev a bit higher, and where the torque down low is a little stronger. So here you notice that in the acceleration zones, the bike doesn't catapult you forward in an extreme way, simply because the course is so compact. I'm riding at lower revs, and I don't really want to start wrestling with the slightly temperamental clutch. That's a weakness. And the second weakness was my total failure at the start. Other than that, what I also noticed is that by now the riding position is good, practical, and comfortable enough that I could last longer on it. But for some reason, I didn't get into really deep lean angles. With the Street Fighter, I was riding a lot more lean angle before, compared to this bike here. For some reason, at 1.85 meters, I couldn't quite position myself perfectly in the saddle. On the BMW, it felt easier for me to find a good riding position, and of course also on the Street Fighter V4S. So for me, it was a bit of a comparison with the Street Fighter V4S, and I'm pretty sure that on this tight course, if I pushed harder, the Street Fighter V4S would actually beat the Panigale V4S. But I have to say, the Panigale still waves the flag proudly. We're talking about a bike with which skilled riders can set astronomically fast lap times on track, and at the same time they've got a machine that's gorgeous, incredibly desirable, and that you can ride to the lake or up an alpine pass without ever feeling out of place in the saddle. Instead, you think this is proper motorcycling, and that's something special, because many manufacturers say supersports on the road don't make sense anymore, it's pointless, blah, 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 but Ducati still celebrates it. In the saddle, you really feel that passion, that a manufacturer has this love for motorcycles, this love for bringing cutting-edge technology onto the road. And they've proved that here on our Mickey Mouse course in Bad Fischau on the little supersport track, impressively, that they can serve up superbike technology, superbike power in a way that's usable. So you can master this compact track and step off the bike grinning. From me, for Ducati. And now I'm curious to hear what the Ducatisti say about the new Panigale V4S. And please, let's not get into the whole single-sided swing arm, double-sided swing arm debate. That topic's already been done to death. The engineers won out over the designers. Nothing we can do about it. From me, it's a thumbs up for the Panigale. Right, time to get on with the lap.